Welcome to Lockbox, a podcast providing real estate professionals with action items for success. My name is Jeffrey Brogger, and I'm going to be your host. I'm the founder of two real estate marketing and tech companies, STEEZY.Digital and realnurture.io. In this podcast, you'll learn from top 1% real estate and mortgage brokers the exact secrets to their success. Welcome to Lockbox. How's it going? Jeffrey Brogger here with the Lockbox podcast. I am here today with Mike Feller. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Jeffrey, really appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you tell our listeners who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, so I'm from Denver, Colorado, originally from the East Coast in Virginia, but right now I run a business called ActivePipe, which is basically a marketing automation platform that's built specifically for real estate. So I'm the chief revenue officer now, and we really focus on really helping agents stay top of mind with their sphere of influence or leads that they bring into their database, and then really also understand really who to contact and when, and who's likely to move in the next 6 to 9 months. So that's kind of at a core of what we do.
That's awesome. And I'm sure we're going to dive deep into that because these are all interest points and reasons why I've created the companies that I've created as well. So we could totally geek out on that and talk more about it. This podcast in particular is focused on, action items for success. And through the personal development that I've done, I've just noticed that you can think it, you can dream it, but until you actually get into action and take consistent actions over a long period of time, you're not going to see any results. So, being the chief revenue officer at ActivePipe, what types of actions did you need to take on a daily basis in order to get there? Like, what would you say was your single most important action that has attributed most to your success?
Yeah, it's a good question there, Jeffrey. I mean, I think from my standpoint, at least at a high level, I come from a sports background. In former life, played some competitive sports, and my mindset's always been, can you get 1% better every day? And every day, if you apply yourself, you get to the end of the day and you look at yourself in the mirror and feel one, you've given it everything you have. But if you can get 1% better, it doesn't sound like much, but over time, that 1% actually has a compounding effect, right? So if you look at the end of the month, if you really apply that, and then in my role, I span across a number of different areas, across sales and marketing and customer success and operations. And so, maybe in a given week, it might be leveling up myself on the sales side of things and really focusing each day on that. And then maybe, the next week it's in marketing. But again, if you apply, I've always felt like if you apply yourself consistently over time, that's where the big gains come from, right? It's not just you don't hit a flip of a switch and all of a sudden you go from 0 to 60. And so for me, that's just one thing that I've always tried to live by. And I think that still extends to the business we're running here today.
No, I love that. That comes down to the compound effect from Darren Hardy, Slight Edge. There's so many books that have alluded to that concept of slight improvements in different areas. To get 10% better, or to grow sales, or for a real estate agent to grow transactions by 30% this year, you don't need to do one thing 30% better. It might be 5 things 5% better, but then the compound effect of all those is actually a 30% gain. Even though it only adds up to 25% in the linear fashion, when they are all compounded together, it has a multiplying effect. So yeah, it's a really key concept in business. And I think real estate agents, brokers are very similar to entrepreneurs in their daily life. When they get that license, they now realize that they have to run a business in addition to, being the sales arm. They got to go hire, recruit, develop, train, implement systems, manage budgets. Like, they have so many other things to do. So, with that concept, that's so applicable to agents and top agents out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do you think the industry is heading? 5-10 year projections, what are you guys doing at ActivePipe that is helping to set up agents for future success?
Yeah, I think on the first question, I know I'm biased, but I think the impact of technology is only going to increase. And I don't think it's going to increase in a linear fashion. I think as an industry, if we're being honest, that I think is still probably 20 years behind in terms of technology. But it's not just technology overall. Like, I think how brokers and agents think about technology is going to continue to change. I think when you look over the last 5 to 10 years. And again, this is my vantage point, but I think there's been a lot of focus on the CRM as being the foundation around technology. And I think what a lot of folks are finding there is that there, in some cases, and again, I'll be very blunt here, that a lot of sometimes these CRMs they get invested in are a little bit bloated. There's a lot of different features and functionality they keep building on. And I think what we're finding is that a lot of agents and brokers actually, what they really want are some of the byproducts of these CRMs, right? Around, having a really world-class marketing system or tool, a really top-class transaction management, and having access to really powerful data. I think that will shift a little bit. I think in one other area that, again, it's probably pretty close to home and take it for what it's worth, but I think that, brokers are going to finally realize that they can't build technology and that it's really difficult to do that. And I certainly hope they do. And I think some of them are learning the hard way about this right now. But, I think a fundamental business principle that I've always believed in, right, is that you stick to the core of what you do best and really be best in the world at that, then figure out what other adjacent problems you can solve. But I think that this is an area that when you look at a lot of these bigger entities that are trying to build out technology themselves, I hope that over the next few years, they're going to figure out that that's maybe not the lane that they necessarily want to play in. So at least hopefully that answers your first question. For us, I think you asked the question there, Jeffrey, around what are we doing to help the agent and everything? Right. I think the centerpiece for us in terms of what we do and why is, can we put empowering technology or life-changing technology in agents and brokerages' hands? That's at the fundamental core of what we do. And I think for us, it's, as technology continually, will continue to make gains, I think they're still going to have their place, right? They're still going to be a critical part of the ecosystem. And for us, it's how do we continue to enable that? How do we continue to level them up and make their daily lives easier, more efficient, and help them actually run more effective businesses? So that's kind of how we're thinking about it, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, and also how we maybe fit into the equation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like what you mentioned about the brokers focusing on what they do best, even the big companies. And we can just call it out. I mean, I have clients that are with Keller Williams, clients with EXP, clients with Compass, all over the board. And Keller Williams in particular is creating, their own AI and their own this and their own that. And it's they bit off a lot. I mean, Keller Williams is a juggernaut in the space, but they bit off a lot when they went on that venture to create their own tech. And, I think you're right on in that. Brokers, especially even top 1% brokers that maybe they have a team of 100 and they're the top 0.1 of 1%, but it's you don't need to now hire an internal software developer team or this and that. It's there are services out there where you can purchase the service or the product, save all that time, years of research and development, and you don't have to take any mental bandwidth to go focus on managing this project, and it'll just instantly be flicked on day one. And that's really the unique value proposition that myself and my company has, lived off of offering brokers for the last 4 years, is helping them with all the digital stuff, being the digital marketing agency, purchasing their media, making sure that their Facebook ad spend is being spent properly, making sure that their Google ad spend, this and that, all that's being managed properly. And so they can then focus on the conversations, the relationships, what they do best. Absolutely. And, I think that's a fantastic point. And technology, I do agree, in the next 5 to 10 years, it will only become more important than it is today. And today it's already critical, right? And so it's just going to become more and more important and exponentially so. And I also do agree with you. And we have an alignment in our company's visions that the real estate agent is still going to be an essential aspect of the transaction moving forward. It's just finding ways to leverage technology to increase opportunities, to get back to consumers faster, better, more efficiently, to look at your sphere. Maybe over your career, you have 5,000, 10,000 or more people in your database. Well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to use some type of AI to know who's kind of raising their hand, who's back in the buyer or the seller mentality based on their internet searches and based on these things, but all that happens automatically and you just get a little push notification. So that's, 100% where I see it going. You still got to go make that call,
Sure.
But it helps you sift through that data and keep in touch with people and stay top of mind and do it at a fraction of the cost of the previous methods of taking those actions. Right?
Well, absolutely. And I think to your point with, if you've got 1,000 people in your database, I think there's a lot of data that shows that, we call it between 14, 15, 16% of those people are likely going to move in the next, 12 months. So how do you know who those are, right? In that case, that'd be, 140, 150-ish people, right? So focusing on your time on those folks versus, really trying to do it in a manual fashion across the entire 1,000, that's really, really hard to do. If you're not really thinking about how do you create leverage, how do you create scale in terms of your efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when it comes to technology, it's great, but you also have to continue personally developing yourself on the mindset side, right? So I want to kind of switch gears here and talk about, some great books that you've read, because I think everyone can relate on books, even if you're not an agent or a broker, but you're an entrepreneur and you've read some amazing personal development books. I think our listeners would be happy to hear that. So what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. The one that I actually read recently was a book called, The Hard Things About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz, and it talks a lot about, certainly from our space, like how hard it is to build a business and really understanding some of the nuances of it. And I think when you look at agents and brokerages, like, they are entrepreneurs, right? And I think that it's looking at the real elements of what it takes to really build a business, scale a business, and understand that it's just not going to be easy all the time. And what do you do and how do you handle that during those times? That one was one really powerful. I actually read that one over again recently. We as a company, I'm sorry?
It was that good.
It was good. It was good. And I think very relevant, extremely relevant for me on a personal level. And also for, some of the things that you could just go through running a startup. There's another one that we've actually spent a good amount of time as a business recently reading, is a book called The Advantage. And The Advantage is, it is a little bit about mindset, and there's some components of that, but it's really looking at like organizational health as a source of competitive advantage, and really thinking about like organizational health as a multiplier of intelligence. And so there's different layers to it where, at the very basic level, there needs to be trust and vulnerable trust in your team. And then ultimately, once you kind of build out your team and understand how to work together effectively and trust each other, then there are layers to really push each other. What is it on the spectrum of healthy and unhealthy conflict, commitment, accountability, all the way through all the way really up and down that chain. So for us, it really just kind of comes down to is looking at how do we think about using organizational health as a source of competitive advantage? Because I think it's an opportunity that you look at the prop tech space. I don't know how many people are really doing that right now. And I'd also venture to ask that same question, even in the brokerage or agent space as well. And I think that the way you guys interact within your team is an opportunity to separate yourself from other folks. And I think mindset plays a big part in that as well. But those are 2 recent ones that spent some time with that probably those are probably the 2 that come top of mind.
Cool. Say the titles again.
The first one is Hard Things About Hard Things. And then the second one is called The Advantage.
The Advantage. Nice.
Yep.
I like that. Both those seem awesome. And I haven't read either. So one of the benefits of having a podcast and asking that question is you get amazing book suggestions.
Yeah. Well, we're not trying to give you more homework here, but.
Hey, it's all good. I have plenty on my plate, but there's always room for more. So I'm curious about success in the light of the failures that it took to get you there. So, how has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have like a favorite failure of yours?
That's a great question. We actually just talked about this with our team. There's a quote Michael Jordan has out there that he's failed in X number of game-winning shots. He's lost X number of playoff games, and that's the reason why he's successful. It's interesting. We literally talked about this in our team meeting 3 weeks ago. I think for one, on a personal level, I actually would go back to my high school days. I played sports for a while and was able to play competitively. In my junior year, I ended up getting recognized as really second team all district, which is in my city area, which for me at the time, I know it's all relative, but that was something that I had bigger aspirations to go and play at the next level in college and beyond. And that really And I found out later on that it was largely because of some internal politics, but also didn't have as good of a season as I really thought I would. And that really drove me to kind of rededicate myself to what I was doing. I was very fortunate that kind of made my way up the ranks the next year, and was able to be recognized actually as an All-American that following year, and got to play at my dream school, University of Virginia, playing college, and then had a chance to go on professionally. And that was one that, I think, again, I look back at that, like it was something I really struggled with because it was not the outcome that I wanted. And I think that really drove me. And then frankly, that type of mentality continues to drive me. I think for me personally, that's one. I think from a business standpoint, I mean, look, I've been in multiple startups here, and not all of them have been successful. And I think that looking back on it, there's a lot of those that I think from a family business perspective, we actually built a business that got to a level of profitability. We ended up, it was a wholesale manufacturing company that sold some baked goods. And, we were able to work with some blue chip brands like Brogger, Whole Foods, and got into hundreds of, actually thousands of stores. But, we kind of got to this tipping point where it was really hard for us to kind of break through to the next level of the scale. And we kind of tapped out after a little while. And that's one where I took a lot of learnings from it, frankly. And there's a lot of things that even going through that kind of failure to break through that next level, a lot of the learnings there has really kind of carried into some of the later, ventures that I've run. And certainly there's a lot of things I'm still applying into the active pipe experience here now.
Yeah, interesting. What sport did you play?
I played soccer.
Okay. And then you had the opt to play pro, did you, for a little bit?
I did. I got drafted by New England Revolution in the MLS and or Major League Soccer. So I unfortunately just struggled a lot with injuries, and that's what ultimately ended up getting me out of the game. I do look at it a little bit back with regret in terms of like really, once injuries kind of got me out, maybe going back into it and giving it another go, but had a good run. And some of my closest relationships, frankly, are guys that I played with. And there's still a lot of things that I know my team would probably echo this, that a lot of the sports influence is very, I think, transferable to business, and kind of who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the questions I asked in the interview process is, did you play sports growing up? And it's like a simple question,
Sure.
but it says so much about somebody. Are they a team player? Are they driven? Are they competitive? And then the other question I ask, which you're welcome to steal. I don't know if it's that genius, but I noticed long ago that high performing people are detail oriented. And then when I heard a public speaker say that, I was like, I want high performers on my team. I'm going to start asking, are you detail oriented in the first application interview process? But here's what I found. When I asked that question, everyone said yes, because they want to look good on the application, right?
Exactly.
So I reframed the question: describe a time when being detail oriented in your job helped you. And then they had to write out a paragraph describing it, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's a little bit harder to fib on. And I'll tell you what, between those two questions, if you just line up that with culture fit, it becomes so much easier to interview and hire, because you find a good culture fit and people that checked off those two questions in the right way for that role, boom, all of a sudden, like, my hiring process got simpler. I was getting better applicants that were coming through to the actual interview process with me. And it was really powerful. So sports, huge. And I think it's very transferable to business.
No, totally. Look, I know I'm biased, and I love the question, to be honest with you. It's one of these things, immediately it went back to one of the best coaches I ever played for, brought up, we had one of the bigger games where we were actually about to play a team to advance to the semifinals. We're in a tournament in Italy, about to play France. And one of the things he said to us before the game was, that still sticks to me to this day, was the bigger the game, the smaller you think. And it's really easy to get caught up in the end outcome and worry, okay, well, what if, because I think we had to win by, I think, 2 or 3 goals to advance. And it was very easy to get caught up with, well, okay, well, what if that doesn't happen? What's the fallout effect of that? And it was a really good reminder, just look, focus on the little things, focus on, closing guys down in space, focus on the weight of your pass, focusing on, first touch and the little details, because if you do that, those little things and the detail that you're talking about, that's what's going to translate in the end result at the end of it. And you'll look up at, the end of 90 minutes and be where you want to be. But
that's right.
So I love that detailed question and the thought process behind it.
Yeah, no, I thank you. And it's so true. And that's the entire point of this podcast. You really just described it from your coach's standpoint, in that France-Italy game where he's telling you the exact same thing that I am attempting to iterate in this podcast. It's like, focus on the small actions, single task.
Absolutely.
Like eliminate distractions, single task on that one most important thing that you could be doing right now. And when that compounds over days, weeks, months, years, at the end of it, you're going to be where you want to be.
Absolutely.
Because you weren't distracted, wasting time, getting frustrated on things you can't control, right? You focused on, boom, here's what I have in front of me right now, execute. And that's just the common thread of all high performers, of all legendary people. You mentioned Michael Jordan earlier. He was obsessive, and same with Kobe Bryant, same with LeBron James. All the greats are obsessive about the craft and the fundamentals and the single little action. This is what I'm doing right now. This is what I'm doing right now. So I really like that. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And this could be non-financial. It could be small, or it could be something significant. But I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll answer it in two ways. One, I made the decision to go back and get my full-time MBA back in 2007. And that was once I got out of sports, I started to get into my first entrepreneurial venture. And what I realized out of that, there were a lot of things that went well, but I quickly learned that there's so many things about it that I really need to level up and learn more. And so I made that decision to kind of invest in myself and go back to school, and was very, very fortunate to go to a very good program. And it was extremely intense. I mean, I think, thinking back to that first year, I mean, it was no joke. I mean, it was pretty much, 7 a.m., Monday through Friday, it was 7 a.m. till almost midnight, just nonstop. And it was like that for the first year. But, there's so many things, and not just from an education standpoint, because the education was fantastic. There's a lot of things that I took away from that experience into, and how I think about business and running businesses now, but also, the relationship side of things there too. There's some of my closest friends are still people I went through that experience with. And that's actually where I would go to the next part of, investing in. But I realized kind of later into my career, as I got into it a little bit more, like how important relationships were to me and how much they matter. I mean, think about how much time you spend at work and time doing things. And I've always been one of these people that gravitated probably more towards a smaller set of high quality or deeper relationships than, more of a quantity type approach. And so, I think it's something where I've learned that, the more I'm investing in these relationships with people, whether that's people at work or friends and family, and being like having intent around that, I've realized how much fulfillment that's added to my life and all that. So I know that's probably not maybe a direct answer to your question, but I think that's something I've realized over time is that just put in the time, put in the work, and put in the intention behind some of these relationships, and certainly ones that matter a lot to me, because that's been really, really important to me.
So one of the best investments you've made is focusing on the relationships in your life.
Yeah, right? I think, and putting effort into it. And I think for us, if we look at a very practical example in our business, like we're a fully remote business pretty much. We originate in Australia, so that's where our home base is. And then, our core group in the US, we're all distributed. We're, in San Francisco, Chicago, Austin, Texas, Denver, myself, New Orleans, DC. So it really takes some intention, just like any relationship, to really kind of put work into it and to really invest time. It's one of these things where it's not easy because you're not sitting next to each other all the time. And, it's something that we talk a lot about with our teams, and especially folks in Australia. It takes some work with it, and it takes the time to ask, and not just on the work-related stuff, but getting to know each other on a personal level, having a little bit of fun, and going beyond just kind of the day-to-day stuff. So sounds simple, sounds easy, but it's actually really, really hard to do.
It is. No, it totally is. And getting into the habit of doing that. I remember I read How to Win Friends and Influence People for the second time. And at the time, I had a ton of things going on, and I felt like I was so focused on just getting things done that my relationships were suffering a bit. And that is just such a good reminder to just, take interest in other people
Yeah.
And when you start to just ask them open-ended questions about themselves, they leave that conversation thinking, wow, I really like Jeff. And they don't know why, but it's because they talked about themselves the entire time.
Sure.
Yeah. And you get into the habit of going through that process. And of course, that habit can easily fade. And so even you saying that was a good reminder to me to maybe, just glance through at my highlights on how to win friends and influence people. Because once again, like that's just such a classic book. And, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, I already read that. But, if you haven't read it in 10 years, maybe read it again. Because when that stuff is fresh on your mind, it's just so much easier to then just go do it and just literally take 30 seconds or 2 minutes and just give someone undivided attention rather than like, okay, good, bye, those little micro moments of like, it's like a little touch. You just like, boom. Okay, cool. Hey, take care. And, just those little, it's like depositing a tiny amount into a bank, but that bank compounds over time.
Sure.
Right. And so you just keep making these little deposits. And then when you need something from them or whatever it is, that relationship is so strong. I think of it in the client standpoint. So there's a huge difference in how my client relationships are today as to when I started my agency. Because when I started my agency, I really wanted to get amazing results for my brokers. So I was so focused on that I didn't take enough time to build the relationship. And nowadays, when a new broker comes on, I send them a welcome letter, send them a book. We meet, however frequently they want, up to, once a week, but definitely at least once a month.
Yeah.
We have a longer meeting, just, hey, how are the leads coming? How's this? How's that? And we develop more of a relationship, because then what happens, and this is so applicable, I think, to the real estate transaction as well. Then when you make mistakes, it's so much easier for them to just forgive you and look past it because you have a relationship.
Sure.
And it's the same thing when you're working with a buyer or a seller in real estate. It's like when you develop an authentic offline relationship, now those little mistakes or things that were overlooked, or you handle something off to an assistant and the assistant dropped the ball, whatever it is, those things can be forgiven because of that relationship. So your relationships are a huge part of life. And I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think by just showing that you have the intellectual curiosity to ask people questions, that you care. And to your point, by doing that, it actually, in a lot of ways, like we're talking a lot about technology, or in the case, real estate agents and brokers, about that particular, that type of transaction. But at the end of the day, like people are behind all of this, right? There's a real opportunity. And I think we really believe this is an opportunity to build up, again, a really significant competitive advantage. And I hate to use the word stickiness behind it, but you're adding value beyond just the technology if you do that. And you can help people, with the, thinking about best practices, or, thinking about different ways to kind of run their business that maybe get funneled through technology or working together. But at the end of the day, again, it's about people. It's about that relationship. And I think that's where you're alluding to it here. That's where I think the staying power is over time. And it really, if you come from leading from a position of help, hard to go wrong there.
Hard to go wrong there. And, as a startup, I guess, C-suite startup, individual, someone who's in it, and you mentioned you've had other startups in the past as well, what is your process for evaluating what to say no to?
One of the things for us, I think you have to, in order to understand what to say no to, I think you have to have a really good foundation understanding of your strategy. And I think your overall strategy really should provide a framework in how you make decisions. When we talk about strategy, we're very close to understanding, like we need to have a deep level of understanding what our strategic anchors are, because then when certain opportunities come up, then you can start to look at what do you say no to. Like if you look at Southwest Business as an example, Southwest Airlines, right? Their entire business is around minimizing the amount of time that a plane spends on the ground, right? And that's the single metric that I think they built their business model around. And that translates itself into how they educate and train their customer support people, how they, what type of airplanes they use. They're all the same, to really minimize the number of parts, if there are breakdowns they use, the airports they go to. So I think the point there is, like, I think their strategic anchors, I think, tend to be like around convenience, easy, low cost, that type of stuff, right? Might be butchering them a little bit. But the point is, when we make decisions, we have to understand what those anchors are. What are, for us, it's like, is this something that's is going to make the product easier to use? Is it something that's going to help us deepen some of our relationships with clients? Is it something that's going to add long-term value to the product? So, and those are just a couple of them. But I think if you understand what those are, when opportunities come up, and if you understand your strategic direction, these anchors, then you have a framework at least to understand and decide what do you say yes to or what do you say no to. That's at least how we think about it. But I think it's got to start and end with strategy and having a clear direction on what you're going towards, and developing some anchors around that. Because if you don't have that, there's a high likelihood that you're going to end up going in directions that probably are not going to be the best ones for you or for the business.
Yeah, such a good point. I love how you brought up strategy. One of my best mentors said, 1 minute of planning will save 2 minutes of execution.
Absolutely.
And it's so true. Yeah. It's so hard sometimes to break away and take that hour to plan your week, to do that yearly retreat with your team and really break down what worked, what didn't, identify your KPIs. Are we still measuring the same things? Does this make sense? Asking those strategic questions, because you're an athlete. Once you're on the field and it's the final minute and, all cylinders are running, you don't have time to strategically think. That needs to have been already done in the practice, right? And so I think about that a lot in business. And it's a great reminder to me, even right now in this moment, like those weekly plannings that I do, the monthly journaling, reflection, like all the little strategy pieces along the way are helping to keep the ship, or, you mentioned Southwest Airlines, to keep the plane on path. The plane from New York to LA is off course 99% of the time, but they land at the exact time on the LA tarmac, right when they're supposed to, because they constantly course correct because they know where they're going. And so having that strategy in place is critical. I like that. It makes it easy to say no. You're like, nope, that's not getting us, that's not in line with our strategy, I should say. It's not getting us closer to the goal.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just where you need that framework to be able to make those decisions.
And is that one of the big pieces? I mean, you can't boil down an MBA into just that one thing, but the importance of strategy and, business planning, is that a major value that you gained from your MBA, or is that more experience just in the field?
No, I think it definitely is. And I think, our program, I went to the University of Virginia, and our program was very case study driven, very general management focused. And so strategy is definitely one of them. Is really, and that's something you learn. But at the end of the day, there's no replacement for being in the chair and actually doing it, right? I think that was definitely one thing I took away from it. I think also probably one of the biggest pluses, I think, of that experience, and one of the biggest things that I've taken throughout my career, is just learning how to trust my own judgment and living with decisions and all that. I think that's something that you just, over time, you kind of build up that skill set around being able to make decisions with incomplete information and or some ambiguity and all of that. And then also, knowing how to live with your decisions, and then what do you do and then learn from them. I think those were some things that I think an MBA, and certainly the experience that I went through, really, I think, set myself up for that next stage in my career. But at the same time, again, there's really no replacement for actually being in the seat and having to actually, like I said, live by the things that you're doing. One thing to do in the classroom, whole another thing to be able to do actually out in real life, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, nothing like the actual experience. So I'm curious if you have any quotes that you live by. Is there anything that has resonated with you, like from all the way when you were a kid and an athlete all the way until now, or maybe something recent, something that was an insightful quote, saying, something you live by?
There was one early on, was probably not going to do it justice, but it was really around what matters is what you do when nobody's looking. And that was one that, even in the early days when I'm playing, to be clear, Jeff, former athlete, the athlete days were a long time ago. But during that time period, that was one of the things that I always took a lot of pride in terms of applying my work ethic and how I devoted myself to fitness, to training, and all of that. Because it's one thing to train hard, during the practice when the coach is there or your other teammates are there, but it's what are you doing? What are you doing when are you getting up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. before anybody else is up, to do certain things and nobody's watching at that point. Like, that's something that really stuck with me throughout my athletic career. And I think it's the same thing now too, because, for me, I'm tasked with running, our entire U.S. business. And I originally I was the first employee here in the U.S. that had to build out the entire go-to-market strategy and build it from the ground up. And I was the only person here for a long time, and the rest of our company was half a world away over in Australia, right? So nobody would have seen what I was doing, and nobody could really watch that all the time. But I also took a lot of pride in the fact that they don't need to be, and they didn't need to be, and it was something that I think I'm really proud, because I think we built out that same type of mentality within the US team, because again, we're all distributed. And I think it's something that if you take true ownership over your domain, there's a lot of empowerment and pride and sense of ownership and that you can take out of that I think is really something that drives me. So that quote, I think that's definitely impacted me both in the sports, the sports career as well as the business one.
Yeah, you're celebrated in public for what you do in private, right?
There you go.
That concept.
Yeah.
I like that. And I am curious, we have done a good job not talking about ActivePipe. So I think it's
Sure.
I think it's time to just shed a little bit of light. If you just want to spend a minute or two describing what ActivePipe is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that though, Jeff. As a marketing automation platform, again, we're really centered around helping agents and brokerages stay in touch with their sphere, with their clients, with their leads, and then also help them understand really like who are the people that are going to be high value, like who are the people that are likely going to in a short time horizon. For us right now, largely centered around email marketing, but we've originally launched some capability in Australia around SMS and texting. And so what we're trying to do is really be best in class around that sort of middle of the funnel, that middle funnel management. That's where we're trying to be best in class for what we do. And then, as we look at over the next couple of years, like I think that's the core challenge that we're solving here. But we're also looking at other ways where can we look at other adjacent problems that we can solve. We recently launched a platform, we recently acquired a company called HomePrezo in this last year that really has helped us level up the content we can provide agents. That we can do some really cool things around dynamic CMA videos or interactive marketer or landing pages and stuff like that. So we're kind of looking at how do we expand the suite while still really remaining core to what we do and true to that. And the other side of it is, for us, we're heavily focused right now on the real estate vertical. That's really where I think we've had a lot of success, and we tend to do most of our business at the brokerage level. And we've got a few hundred brokerages now on the platform here in the US and growing at a really good clip there. And so again, we're largely focused on the real estate space now, but we have application across mortgage, insurance, commercial, auto, et cetera. And so for us, it's not really a question of if, but more a question of when we jump into some of those other verticals.
Got it. That makes sense. And, email, SMS follow-up is critical for staying top of mind. Yeah. Do you have things already built out for buyer journey, seller journey, maybe like a more informational one for a first-time home buyer? You have that because you're specific to real estate. When someone comes online, does it include things like that are pre-built? They've already been tested across hundreds of users. Is that the kind of experience that ActivePipe offers?
Yeah, absolutely. And, for us, we're thinking about, how do we use some intelligence to, one, drive the type of content that we can send to, the agent's clients, but also two, then again, understand kind of what's actually happening in the database. And so right. For us, you highlighted a great example of that. We can build out these full-blown customer journeys that go 6 to 9 to 12 months out that, frankly, the more people interact with them, the smarter they get. So we can see, as an example, we can see, Jeff, what listings you're interacting with. And so let's send you more of those or send you more content that they're going to cater to your interests. So one, our system gets smarter and smarter the more people interact. And so those customer journeys become much more tailored, much more personal, much more relevant. But also directly to your question, yeah, that's part of what I think one of our big value adds as a company, that for us going deep into real estate, I think we can provide a very different customer experience than a HubSpot or MailChimp or Constant Contact or some of those guys. They're fantastic at what they do. But out of the box, we can help these brokerages or agents launch, first-time homebuyer campaigns, launch, post-transaction campaigns that are specific to those, or customer journeys, right, on a full-blown basis. So I think that's where we can look at across our, tens of thousands of agents and hundreds of brokerages and say, okay, these are some of the things that are really, really working well, and build some best practices and optimize some of that stuff. So those are some things that we can certainly do above and beyond just the technology itself.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I like the intelligence of following up with dynamic listings based on what they've interacted with. That type of functionality with follow up is definitely cutting edge for the real estate space.
Yeah.
It having that type of dynamic follow up and just not being so static. Like, your brokerage wrote this email campaign 10 years ago and you're still sending it to everybody regardless of their journey. It's like, or your megabox CRM from whatever it is, KV Core, Sync, I mean, you name them, they have these canned responses, but if you don't go put in that work to actually update them to you as the agent of the broker, then it's not going to be nearly as effective.
Correct.
But that takes work and that takes time. And so, maybe consider Active Pipe, which could come in from day one and have a much more updated, dynamic customer journey for the buyers and the sellers. So I think that's hugely valuable. It's really cool.
No, thank you. And I think you highlighted there is the difference between static and dynamic, right? And doing things in a dynamic way. And I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this a lot in your careers, that I think there tends to be a stigma around automation, that automation has to be generic or it has to be stale. And I think in a lot of our clients, or not just our clients, but a lot of people that we see in our space, that the idea of automation is, okay, let's just send out a monthly newsletter. Okay, great. You can do that and you can have that recurring, but we got to really think about how do we meet the buyer where they are, or how do we meet your client where they are in their specific journey? The only way you do that is by hitting different nurturing points that if you can automate that, you can still automate those things and still do it in a dynamic way. But I think there tends to be a resistance around that simply because I think there's historically or traditionally been this stigma that it has to be stale or it has to be generic. But I think we're kind of breaking that mold.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a big focus of my company, particularly STEEZY.Digital and then realnurture.io. Those two companies, which I'm founders of, they focus on basically conversational AI and having automated responses going out on behalf of the broker or the agent to the buyer or the seller. Now that's hosted on either Facebook Messenger, SMS text, things like that. But the thought that it has to always be, hey, let me go grab somebody, like a standard type of chatbot response where the chatbot failed and didn't know what to say. So it's like, let me go grab someone.
Yeah.
That's not what this is.
Sure.
Right. This is actually one by one of the thousands of questions that have come into our clients over the years. We have tied those to a human typed response where it's like, no, this question should go here. This question should go here, and trained an AI database so that now when someone asks a buying question, boom, we get them to either a home search or call now, or ask a selling question. Hey, I got a house on, and they put an address in. We then walk them through the selling process, call now, schedule a call. So to the point of automation with today's technology does not have to be static. It does not have to be generic. It can be the right piece of information at the right time, branded to you as the broker or the agent. And that's the type of stuff that Active Pipe and then my companies are offering, which is phenomenal. Like that's exactly where I think things are going, because as you grow as a broker, the traffic to you becomes almost unmanageable.
Yeah.
If you do have tons of agents and tons of inbound leads, then the problem is not lead generation. Yeah. The problem is nurture and conversion.
Exactly.
And so that's always been a big focus of mine, and I'm glad you guys see that as well.
Oh, 100%. And look, again, I know we're conscious of where we come from, but there's really no point in pouring a bunch of fuel on lead gen if you don't have the right systems of follow-up in place. And if you don't have those, and you have some leads that fall through the cracks, you're going to have a lot of leakage, and unfortunately, it's not going to be an investment that you're going to see the return that you want, right? So for us, it's if we can get those systems in place to nurture, to follow up, to making sure that those are really, really, really strong, then go and pour some fuel on lead gen because you got the right processes in place to be able to support that.
That's right. Yeah, you got to be able to convert them. And that's key.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, Mike, is there anything that I should have asked you or maybe a question from earlier that you'd like to expand upon?
I think the only thing I would say is when I talked about the organizational health side of things, within our business, I mean, I think that's an area where when we look at our opportunity in this space, I think we're very fortunate that I think we add a lot of value, to an agent and a brokerage's lives, but we're also looking at like, how do we as a business learn to kind of operate more effectively and more efficiently to be able to capitalize on that and be able to get that in more and more people's hands. That's one thing that I think it's an opportunity or an example that I think we do that a little bit differently than some other folks in the space. So I don't know if that's well necessarily to highlight, but we're looking at, and it really is just centered around people. It's really around the fantastic group of people that have been very fortunate to work with and build this business around that are really kind of creating these opportunities. But I think it's, when you look at this space again, yes, we talk a lot about technology, we talk about a lot of what we do, but it really is about the people side of things. And certainly for us, we're at this tipping point in scaling the business where, in terms of the number of people we have on the team, that those kind of things, especially for entrepreneurs and people, building out startups, that it's basically going to be at the hands of your people. Whether or not you're successful is going to be really contingent on your ability to attract and retain top talent and be able to work really efficiently together. But so I'm not sure if that's relevant to what you're asking, but that was one thing that kind of came top of mind there.
No, it is. I mean, the listeners of this podcast are top 1% real estate and mortgage brokers. So the fact that they need to recruit and retain top talent is a pain point they're well aware of. And that organizational health piece is such a great point to bring up, because you get to a point where you no longer can do everything. And a lot of my listeners are way past that point, but they are at the point where they're trying to recruit, they're trying to at someday retire, right? Like they're 55, they've been doing this for 20 years. They don't want to keep doing this forever. Yeah. So they want to either have a self-sustaining team with basically an apprentice that has taken it over, or to sell that thing and cash out, right? But in order to sell it, they can't be the person who's producing 80% of the revenue through their own transactions, right? They need to have trained, hired, and recruited and developed a team to replace themselves in every day-to-day activity. And that comes down to effective recruiting process and then retaining them through organizational health. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Now, I think you're going to see over time, like in any business, you hit these inflection points at, say 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 employees, right? And as you hit those inflection points, again, the importance of people it really increases over time.
Yep, absolutely. Well, awesome. How can listeners contact you if they're interested?
Email is totally fine with me. My email is just mike.feller@activepipe.com. So feel free if there's any questions or anything that I could be helpful with. I think email is probably the easiest one to get to. Kind of ironic that we're in email marketing.
Yeah.
Try and make it easy.
Say.
Yeah. Or hit me up on LinkedIn as well.
There you go. Mike Feller. You'll see his name in the description below. So thank you for being here, Mike Feller, the Chief Revenue Officer of ActivePipe. I really appreciate your insight, not only from your business acumen, but also the sports and your professional sports experience. One of the coolest things that I remember most from this interaction was that coach advice in the France-Italy game. Like that's like a really cool, sticky story that, I think that was an amazing thing for you to share and very insightful for our listeners. So thank you. Really appreciate it. And, thanks for being on.
Yeah, really appreciate it, man. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for listening. If you want to accomplish your real estate goals, then I highly suggest downloading my free Ultimate Real Estate Goal Setting Framework. The link is in the description of the show, and it will help you break down your annual income goal into the amount of phone calls, appointments, or open houses you need in order to achieve that goal. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.